And we are live, just as we all take a sip of water. Hello, everyone. My name is Bridget McNulty. I am the co-founder of Sweet Life Diabetes Community. I'm just double checking that we are definitely live. Yes, it seems we are. So I'm so excited to be here with you today. I'm Bridget McNulty, and I have been living with type 1 diabetes for 15 years, but I have never been interviewed with my significant other. So I am very excited to be interviewing Daniel Scher, type 1 and clinical psychologist, and his wife, Jessica Scher, who's a speech language therapist. I have a whole lot of questions, and we're going to be doing all the questions that we've gathered. We're going to be asking Daniel and Jess, but please also feel free to post any questions that you have here. Hi, Charmaine. Thanks for posting the first comment. Great to have everyone here. There will also be a recording of this later, so welcome to anyone who is watching later. I want to say before we begin, big thanks to Vital Air Diabetes for sponsoring this event. You might not recognize their name. Vital Air Diabetes acquired Epitech Diabetes in July 2022, and they are now the supplier of Dexcom and Tandem in South Africa. So, welcome. I'm Bridget McNulty. I'm here with Daniel Scher and Jess Scher. And my first question is, how long have you guys been together, and why would you want to do a Facebook Live about your relationship? Are you very confident?
I think I'll jump in there. We've been together, because he probably doesn't know how long we've been together, to be fair. So let me answer. We're actually coming on 8 years in December, so it's quite exciting. And our 4-year marriage anniversary is coming up in February. So yeah, we've been together, a large part of our adult lives. And I think we kind of, when this opportunity came up, we kind of decided that it was a really important topic to actually just start a dialogue about. It does add another dimension to a relationship, and we know relationships take a lot of work, and to add an extra component, I think it's really good to talk about it. To when I started thinking about how to support Daniel best, and I was looking up resources, there wasn't too much available. So, maybe we can provide some insights. Maybe from the community we can get even more. So it's a good conversation to have.
Absolutely. And I think what's so lovely about this too, I've been thinking about partners a lot lately because I knew this was coming up. And I think the initial thing we always think about is a girlfriend or boyfriend or spouse as a partner. But there are actually so many different partners that people with diabetes have. So it could be a parent relationship. It could be a child. I know a lot of children are really worried about their parents who have diabetes. It could be a friend, a close friend. It could be a colleague. Like, this is really for every kind of partner that we have in life with diabetes. And I want to encourage everyone, thank you all for being here. I want to encourage you to ask any questions that you have. We have a whole bunch of questions as well. And the reason we're doing this is because there are so many questions about how to be the partner of someone with diabetes. And I think it's also important to talk about the hard stuff. I think one of the things that's so interesting about diabetes is that you can't really be a silent partner, because even if you take the attitude of, oh, well, they'll look after themselves, if they don't look after themselves, it's going to have a long-term impact on your life, right? Because of long-term complications. And so, for everyone who's here and everyone who's watching afterwards, I just want to say welcome and thank you for being here. And hopefully this is the first step in that conversation about partners. Jess, I'm going to throw a question at you first, because one of the things we get asked a lot is, when is the ideal time to tell someone that you're dating that you have diabetes? Maybe you don't want to tell it on the first date, but you also don't want to seem like you're keeping a secret. Do you remember when Daniel told you about his diabetes, and how did you feel about it?
So Daniel and I met in Boston at UCT. So we met as kind of acquaintances first. And when I first found out he was diabetic, we were actually sitting, I remember very clearly, we were sitting on the steps of the social science building in UCT, and he was testing himself, and I said, do you have diabetes? And then I asked him, does it affect your life a lot? And he looked at me and was, yes, of course it does. I mean, he was very kind and polite about it, but I walked away from him wishing I hadn't asked that question, because it's quite awesome. so that was when we first met, and I mean, it was kind of put out there sort of immediately. And then, I walked away thinking, oh, that's a very nice person. I'm glad to have met him. And a couple of years later, we actually reconnected, and that's when we started our relationship. And, Daniel's always handled it very well. He's always taken it in his stride. I think as our relationship deepened and as we got closer, I started to think, oh, this is actually quite serious, and I am taking on something here. Something not extra, but just something additional.
Yeah. It is something extra. Yeah.
And I think I went through a phase of maybe being a little bit, maybe I still do it, but a little bit too on him. And we kind of had to work that through. I had to learn to trust him. I had to keep reminding myself he lived with it for a long time before I came along. But also just weighing up how exactly to be a good spouse, how to support him. Did I answer your question?
It's challenging, absolutely. What I find so interesting is that, so for me, my experience was completely different. My husband and I have been married for 11 years, but we've been together for 16. And we were together for a year before I was diagnosed. And he has a brother who's a type 1 who was diagnosed when they were kids. And so for him, it was completely a non-event. Like, I was like, oh my God, I have type 1 diabetes. And he was like, okay, well, I mean, it's important that you get better, but you're going to be fine. Like, that was literally better. And like at the time, I was a little like, I think I could do with some sympathy here. But I've mentioned this to Daniel before. I think it was really helpful in framing my view of diabetes because I didn't ever have that sense of learned helplessness. Like, I didn't think I deserved special attention, and so I didn't get any special attention. But I think it's so different for every relationship. And I also think there's nothing wrong with saying that there is some hesitation in committing to someone with a chronic condition, like any chronic condition. It doesn't have to be diabetes. Like, obviously, we would prefer that everyone we know is in good health. It's not the reality, but I think it's okay to say that. Daniel, your turn. Did you ever feel weird about disclosing that you had diabetes?
Did I feel weird about disclosing?
No, did you ever, like, to a potential partner or
no, personally, I mean, look, I've had diabetes since I was 18 months old.
Okay.
So it's sort of been a matter of, this is just who I am. It's my identity, and I'm very fortunate in that, when I was young with diabetes, I had the right sort of support, which enabled me to feel confident and comfortable in just being forthright about it and owning it. But certainly, a lot of the people that I work with speak about difficulties in disclosing it, feelings of shame, fears of abandonment, those sorts of things. It happens
and
a lot.
Is there an ideal time? Like, if someone is coming to you and saying, I've just started dating someone, I don't know at which date or how many times I should have seen them before I say, do you have any advice? What do you offer?
I mean, I guess it's different for different people, obviously, but it's always going to be a matter of balancing two things. Firstly, generally speaking, honesty gets you a long way in relationships. Honesty is a virtue that things become far less complicated if you're guided by that virtue. But the other thing that needs to be weighed up against this, the striving towards honesty is how comfortable you are. And it's okay if you choose to delay disclosing this condition until you do feel comfortable. As to what the time frame actually is, different strokes for different folks.
No magic number. Yeah. So when we asked on our community what questions people who are partners of people with diabetes had, the biggest ones that came out, unsurprisingly, were about parents. Cameron put it so beautifully. She said, how do you switch off or rest while still trying to be an amazing parent to your type 1 toddler? I found this very hard to do. I'm so anxious that something will go wrong. For example, at night, I get 2 to 3 hours max of sleep. And I mean, this blew my head. I'm very bad on not a lot of sleep. She said, the rest of the time I wake up checking my son's pump or just checking if he's still breathing. It sounds insane, but this disease is super tiring for me as a caregiver, not to mention how the actual type 1s feel. I mean, first of all, I want to say, I think the actual type 1s have an easier time than the parents of type 1 toddlers because it's our bodies and we know what we're doing. But then Heidi agreed, I'm going to throw it at you now, but she said, watching my son today for an hour taking care of my granddaughter was hectic. There's not a minute that you can switch off and relax. You parents are superheroes. Today you kept your child alive. I mean, it gives me goosebumps. I got nothing. I'm hoping you've got something. Some advice, like how do you ever switch off if it's actually probably in your child's best interest that you don't switch off?
Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that, well, certainly a parent's job is massive. I mean, you have to keep your child alive, and now you're adding a very tricky, it's not just a tablet a day kind of diagnosis. I mean, it really does need that intensive monitoring. And I think at that age, you kind of, you can't expect somebody else to do it, right? I mean, mom or dad kind of are the primary caregivers. I think, I mean, I'm just going to talk about the sleep because I'm also kind of hopeless on not enough sleep.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that we find a way for that mom to get some better sleep. I mean, is there more technologies? Could we use the pump better? Could there be an alarm? Could we look at trends? Maybe, is the child going low during the night? Is the child going very high? Can we look at, can we strategize around that so that we can hopefully a couple of hours more at these longer stretches?
That's a very good point, actually, because it might be as simple and complicated as trusting the technology more. Hey, because if you've got a pump that alarms, maybe it's testing it out during the day, which doesn't feel like such a time to check that actually it does alarm when you need it to, and then being able to trust it more at night.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I mean, the opportunities that technology, the way that it stands these days, provide us with for minimizing the anxiety that previously was inevitable. It's massive. It's the fact that we can have a CGM that alerts us to variations in blood sugar. I mean, it's a complete game changer. And, it's really, obviously, it's incredibly unfortunate that technology isn't more accessible, to a wider demographic.
At least to kids. I know.
At least. I mean,
the kids and parents of kids get just all my love and support. I want to thank everyone. We've got comments streaming already. Hi Lynn, hi Marianne, hi Bridget. Thank you so much for being here. Brigitte has asked a question that follows on from this. How or where do you ask for help if you're experiencing caregiver burnout? I think that's such an important one because I feel like there's kind of this, I feel like in the last year or two, we've given people with diabetes a lot of permission to feel burnout, but there almost isn't the same permission for caregivers because it's just assumed that parents are superheroes, I guess, and can constantly have strength. I'm a parent. I'm not a superhero, and I do not constantly have strength. Yeah. So any tips there, Daniel?
Yeah. I mean, okay, so the caregiver burnout is a very, very real phenomenon that isn't spoken about enough. It has been researched thoroughly, though, not just in the context of diabetes, but in the context of a whole range of medical and psychological conditions. And we need to know, firstly, that it's a common occurrence, especially if you have a younger child. A toddler, somebody pre-adolescence, even adolescence, the burden that parents take on is very, very real. But often there's a sense of shame around acknowledging that and getting support for it.
Which is crazy because there really shouldn't be. But I can also kind of get it because as a parent, you think, I should be able to do whatever my child needs. Should be able to.
Right. And that's a very problematic discourse, but it's a very real thing for a lot of people. So I think, to answer that question, the first step is to identify the process, to identify it and own it, and to name it. I'm burnt out, I'm exhausted. And from there, that gives you some vocabulary to start having conversations. The conversation, it can be, I mean, if the scenario is appropriate, then you can have that conversation with the partner about how we can better support one another to support our young one, or how we can better support one another as spouses when one of us has diabetes. But if that conversation is not an option, then it's worth speaking to a medical practitioner and asking about support groups, asking about counselors or psychologists close to you that can help you to address burnout.
Yeah. And I do think it's so important also just to normalize it, right? So like, let's start that normalizing now. If you're a caregiver of any description, if you're a parent, if you're a child looking after an elderly parent, I am a child looking after an elderly parent, and I have caregiver burnout at the moment. Like, if you are a friend, but you're the number one point person, there are so many people who might be experiencing caregiver burnout, and it's normal, and it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means you're human and you're tired.
Yeah.
And we're all human and we all get tired.
Yeah. And needing a break doesn't equal failure. I mean,
no.
Really,
no. And that's actually such a nice way of putting it. It can also be needing a break, right? It doesn't have to be giving up or like stepping away or failing. It can just be, I need a little time out to pull myself towards myself.
Yeah. Right.
Marianne has said she's battling to get, I just figured out the comments thing, sorry guys. Battling to get stable sugar readings from my husband. He stays permanently hungry even after a meal, and his snacks help. So, I mean, from a dietary perspective, it's probably a good idea to chat to a dietitian. If he's permanently hungry, then maybe his eating plan needs adjustments. I think what would be helpful to speak to, if you guys could speak to, is this pervasive, I know it's pervasive because I get asked about it a lot, kind of tendency we have where if the partner is very involved, they take responsibility, and then if they don't take responsibility, the person with diabetes feels like they can cheat and it doesn't count, or they can eat whatever they like, and if their partner doesn't see it, then it doesn't count. I mean, we know that's not true because diabetes is on the inside, but how do you, like, do you guys ever have that, or how do you deal with that?
You go ahead.
That was a knowing look.
Yeah. No, look, it's a complicated dynamic to manage, and it's an important dynamic to talk about, because there is there's no magic number in terms of how much support. You can't say 3 hours of support per week is adequate. 5 hours is even better. 2 hours is not sufficient. We can't quantify it, and support will vary between couples, and the amount of support required is also going to vary throughout your own life as a person with diabetes.
Yeah.
So it really is best to approach that kind of dynamic, in my experience at least, as a dynamic sliding scale, but importantly, one which we talk about over and over again. And
that's a novel idea.
Communicate.
That literally hadn't occurred to me, that you can talk to the person about it. How without it being awkward?
Well, for us, I'm a psychologist and Jess is a speech therapist.
We
so
talk.
This is your vibe.
Right.
For mere mortals who are not psychologists and speech therapists, because practically, like, okay, so Marianne wants to talk to her husband about his blood sugar readings and doesn't know how to bring it up, because you don't want to be the diabetes police, right? You don't want to be like, bring it up when they're eating something you don't want to, or not even Marianne, anyone. How do you bring it up in normal life in a way that doesn't feel confrontational and doesn't feel like the diabetes police?
So I think to not, if I would not bring it up in the moment, I would bring it up another time.
Okay.
When maybe when other people aren't around, when it's just the two of you, he's not about to dig into that piece of cake, another time. And then just ask the question, I'm worried about how you're eating. Should I be worried? Is there a reason you're eating that way? Is there some way I can help you?
Okay.
How do you feel about what's
How
happening?
do you feel about it?
Also naming, so Jess just named her concern, which is
Yes.
very, very powerful in taking the pressure off of the
Yeah, that
person.
takes the sting out of it, right? It's not saying, look at this thing you're doing. It's saying, this is how I'm feeling. Am I feeling this way? Do you agree with the way I'm feeling? Oh, that feels so much better.
Yeah.
Also, you guys have just answered how you can do a Facebook Live about your relationship because you're both so good at communicating. The rest of us are not so good at communicating.
Yeah, not always. We also don't get it right sometimes. I still don't understand why, when I had a Lindt bunny and a Cadbury chocolate, he decided to eat the Lindt bunny. Still don't understand that.
Obviously. If you don't get treats that much, you have to take the quality ones.
Right.
Makes perfect sense to me. Okay, so while we're talking about this same tricky conversations, Nanese asked, is it okay for a person with diabetes to drink alcohol every weekend? I mean, I'm going to say I have a gin every day. I have a gin and soda every day. I don't even tonic because it's full of sugar. But we did an AMA and Ask Me Anything last year with Prof. Siegel, who said that if you drink a glass of alcohol before eating, it helps the carbs to metabolize. And I've taken that as gospel truth. I was having a gin before then anyway. So is it okay to drink every weekend? I mean, I think the answer is probably moderately, and it depends what you're drinking, and you shouldn't be drinking mixes, and beer has a lot of carbohydrate in it, and you need to be very aware of your blood glucose when you're drinking. But what I really want to talk about is the diabetes police and alcohol, and the diabetes police and treats, because there's the mental health side of it too, right? There's the, I'm living with a chronic condition. I want to be able to kick back and relax and hang out with my friends and not feel like I'm sick, versus, is this a healthy diet or should I be doing this? What you got?
Right. So, like, as people with diabetes, obviously we need to keep in mind all of the risks associated with alcohol use and how those apply to us, and how we might be at greater risk of, drinking too much, going low, big problems, or having long-term physical health. We know that story. But in the context of this discussion, I would pose the question, how much is this about the diabetes versus about our relationship?
Because that's interesting.
I mean, it's relevant. Alcohol in excess is bad for anybody. And sure, as diabetics, we maybe have a greater risk, and maybe that conversation needs to be had a little bit more assertively in the context of diabetes. But is this really about the diabetes? Is this not a conversation that we can have separate from the diabetes? So if Jess is drinking 3 gins every night, I'm going to say to her is,
I thought that was a statement. I was trying not to look judgmental when you were like, Jess is drinking 3 gins a night. And I was like, oh, that seems like kind of a lot every night. Okay, that was a for example, if Jess was drinking 3 gins a night.
Big if. But, I would be having that conversation as a loving spouse, because that's suggesting, okay, so there's something happening that's driving that behavior. And my impression here is that diabetes doesn't necessarily need to be the focus of this conversation, but certainly it's a conversation that should be had if there's concern.
That is great advice. Renique has had such an interesting comment here. I also think it's so important to praise the good that the diabetics are doing instead of just reprimanding the bad blood sugars or cheat meals. That's powerful. Absolutely. I remember chatting to my friend Suzanne once, and she was saying her husband looked at her graphs on her Freestyle Libre and was like, whew, those spikes go like really high and really low. She was like, no, this was a great day. What are you talking about? And then he looked at, like, she showed him like reference material, and he was like, oh, okay, I understand it more. Oh, no, they went to the endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist was like, wow, you're doing so well. And I think it can be very easy from the outside. I don't know, because I'm not on the outside, but I'd be curious what you think, Jess, to kind of be able to be like, oh, come on, do better, or don't do that, or don't eat that, or whatever. Whereas from the inside, it can feel as if some days you're just doing your best, and you really just need your partner to be on your team.
And you don't want to just be reprimanded the whole time. I think validation and acknowledgement of the difficulty of the weight of the diabetes, and it's all part of support, isn't it? I mean, if you want to be a supportive spouse, you can't be highlighting the negatives all the time. You've got to look at the other side, and also just acknowledging that it's a difficult thing to manage, and sometimes just acknowledging it can be enough,
because that almost makes the invisible visible. Hey, if someone's like, I remember one of the best things anyone in my family ever said to me about my diabetes was, we were away together I have 3 older brothers, so my family's enormous. They all have families. We were away over New Year, and I snuck away to take my nighttime long-acting insulin. And everyone else was enjoying it. It was New Year's Eve. Everyone else was outside around the bride, living their best lives. And my dad walked through as I was injecting, and he said, "Oh, my girlie, you never get a break, do you?" And I was just like, "Oh, no, I never get a break, do I?" And I just felt so still makes me teary. I felt so seen and understood, and I didn't need him to do anything. I just, the fact that he saw me in that moment and recognized that I can never switch it off was so powerful. Clearly still makes me emotional. I want to talk to Sam here. He says, "I hate this life, can't deal with it. Any tips with diet? Need to lose weight? Any positive one word for me tonight?" Come on, let's give Sam a positive one word.
Okay.
I'm throwing this at you guys. What you got? If you feel like you're hating diabetes and can't deal.
Yeah. Well, it's not one word, but you're not alone.
Yeah.
3 words. You're not alone. It's a really, really tough condition to manage. It's chronic. We don't get a break, and it's incredibly challenging, and it's normal to struggle. The important thing, though, is what you do with that struggle. And remember, this is not a condition that we can be managing on our own. We need support. We need that support from our medical team, and we need it from our loved ones. And it's important to express to them the struggles that you're going through so that you can get the right support.
Absolutely. Here. I want to quickly segue a little bit before we move on to the right level of support. Lynn has said, we meet family members every day where mom and dad haven't shared a room for years because they take turns sleeping in their child's room to make sure their child survives the night because they can't afford flash glucose monitors or a CGM. It would really be incredible if all of us could get help from our medical aid to completely cover children's senses so parents can at least have a marriage. Imagine how that child feels knowing it's their fault that their parents don't have a marriage. I mean, that hadn't even occurred to me before, but what is the impact on a child later on in life knowing that their diabetes kind of stole a lot of their parents' relationship with each other? So I do want to say, in case people aren't aware of it, that if you are on Discovery Medical Aid, all children are covered for up to the price of 2 Freestyle Libras or that amount towards a Dexcom or the Medtronic. We're still working on the other medical aids. And if anyone here wants to join us in working, the challenge is that as Discovery members, SA Diabetes Advocacy, our founders are Discovery members. And so we've gone directly to Discovery. The other medical aids don't want to talk to us because we're not members of their medical scheme. So if you are a member of another medical scheme and you want to get involved, please email me and or DM me on Facebook, and we will give you all the tools to be able to do that. Because I mean, the children thing, for me, no child should be pricking their finger. And the trouble is that until we get it mass adopted in private, in medical aids, the chances of getting it mass adopted in public are much smaller. So this is the first step on the journey.
Yeah, you have to put the pressure on.
Yeah. And the thing is, it has to be consistent pressure. And I mean, the children argument is very hard for them to fight. So I know that Momentum is offering something, but not an official benefit. And the others you have to apply to get like on a person by person basis. But if you have any questions about that, please reach out and we will give you all the information we have. Coquetto is asking a question I would like to answer to. How do you try to avoid the festive season temptations and still be able to control your blood sugar levels, because it tends to become tricky? And I want to say here too, like, how do you enjoy the festive season? Like, how do you get the right balance of keeping your blood sugar in range, not feeling guilty for wanting to treat, but also just like, guys, we need to kick back a little bit. What do you do? Daniel, are you good the whole year round? Please say no.
Yeah. Look, I'm good dietary wise, but
Okay.
look, that's not how everybody. When I say I'm good, what it is for me.
You ate a Lindt bunny, so you're not a saint.
That's it. Okay, I'm not always good. No, but the thing is, fluctuations in blood sugar, for me, the discomfort that I get from the symptoms are far worse than the FOMO that I would get from not eating desserts.
Okay.
Now, that is not the case for everybody. In fact, I would say the majority of people with diabetes have a desire to be able to participate, to eat the dessert, to eat the carbs, to let loose and to enjoy themselves. And it's really important, as you're saying, Bridget, to allow oneself to do that. In fact, that's a really, really good way of warding off diabetes burnout later down the line. Make sure that you're taking a holiday. Of course, you need to do that safely. So what I'd recommend in this situation is chatting to your doctor and saying, I want to be able to let loose a little bit over the holidays. How can we do this safely?
Yeah. If you've got the right doctor.
If you've got the right doctor.
Because doctors seem to give advice. Can I tell you guys something that is not really in confidence because there's a bunch of you? But I went to the SEBSA conference. So SEBSA is the Society of Endocrinologists. And I walked around the various booths and I have never seen so much sugar in my life. Every single booth had a fishbowl filled with sugar. It either had because they tried lure people into their booths. It had sweets or chocolates. The snacks on display were cookies. I was outraged. I was like, you're telling all of us never to let the evil sugars pass our lips. And then look what happens at your conference. So I can give I'm not angelic, but I choose carefully. So that's how I deal with the festive season, is I'll choose. So if I know that I'm going out and I want to have a nice dinner that night and I'm definitely going to have carbs or dessert, then I'll have salad for lunch. I generally have salad for lunch too. I try and have the same breakfast and lunch most days because that takes out the guesswork. You don't want to be doing guesswork 3 meals a day. Then you're going to have a terrible day. So if you know what's coming and you can make the rest of the day kind of boring, I find that helps. And then also sometimes I will just give myself a meal off. If I'm going to a wine farm and it's going to be one of those fabulous multi-course meals, I'm not going to be able to dose for that perfectly. And so I just give myself a break before I go, because in that case, I think the mental health benefits of having a break are greater than a couple of hours out of range. Carl says he missed the intro, so I'm going to just do another intro for you, Carl. Welcome, Carl Helberg. Seems like I need even more reminders and notes in my life. Join the club, don't we all? Dan is the psychologist. He's Daniel Sure. He's a type 1, living with type 1 since he was 18 months old. Is that right? And a clinical psychologist. And he is here with his wife, Jessica Sher, who is a speech language therapist. And they are good communicators, which is why they are willing to have their relationship in the spotlight. He is a psychologist. We had in a previous series about mental health because I'm a one-trick pony and I asked Daniel to cover anything ever about mental health. The video was dark. I'm glad this video isn't dark. He does have a lovely voice. And Sam has said, we both look happy and stress-free. Hope to be the same in future. Now it's just overwhelming to think of being diabetic. I mean, it's also time, hey? I've had it for 15 years. You've had it for 30 something?
32.
32 years.
Like, I sometimes think it's a matter of practice. Like, you hit your stride after a decade, maybe. Like, it does, it does have an impact. Charmaine wants to know how come she's losing so much weight. Charmaine, we have an article that deals with that perfectly. I don't want us to get too distracted because we're not dietitians here. My next big question from the community, this is a biggie. Watch yourself. So there were all these people who wanted to know, is there a right level of support? So a little while ago, we asked, how does your family support you? So first of all, I asked, is your family very supportive when it comes to diabetes? Expecting that everyone else would be like, oh yes, they're so wonderful. And then I could be like, well, mine doesn't give me any special attention. And most people were like, oh, no, I'm left to my own devices. But then I wanted to know specifically, how do people show support? Like, what does support actually practically look like? So Vashni said, my husband's very supportive to the extent where he'll bring my sugar machine and check my sugar, get my insulin, make sure I'm eating healthy. Then Paul said, family can be terrible. I get offered cake every day. And Sharon said, I can't think of anything. It's just accepted I can look after myself, and I appreciate that. So those are like the three completely different scenarios, right? Like super supportive, super unsupportive, and kind of leaving you to your own devices.
Yeah.
How do you figure out what you need?
Well, I mean, I think what you need can vary, right, from day to day. Sometimes you do need somebody to bring you your machine and help you test. And other days you don't want to be kind of like nagged to test or whatever. So I try just take my cue from Dan. You know, I just try and follow his lead. And then sometimes I just kind of make my own decisions. So we went to the Kruger recently, and he brought a few sweets with him, and then I decided that wasn't enough, so I went off to the shops, bought some more, and made sure we always had some on the drive. We ended up bringing those sweets back. We didn't need so many, but you know, for my own peace of mind, I needed to know that we had more than we needed. You know, from that, I don't know how did you feel about that? But you know, I just needed to know that we had enough. So that's kind of how we handle it, I think. But yeah, some days I do just need to leave him be, and you know, he guides me a lot.
I think it can be tricky too if you are used to doing it all on your own. It can then be tricky to ask for help because that's not the norm. Yeah. And so then it's kind of like a really big deal then if you do ask for help. I don't know. So can you give us some communication tips, maybe, Daniel?
Sure. Look, it's a really good thing to talk about, and we need to also keep in mind that there are different ends to this continuum. So for some of us, it's about learning to open up and be vulnerable with this person who we've let into our lives and ask for help and express when you're struggling. And that's a skill that needs to be practiced. For some people, it takes a while to get there. And for some people, myself included, it's a work in progress. It's something, you know, you've been independent and self-reliant for 20 years, and now you need to share this for your own good. It's tricky, but know that time facilitates a sense of safety in a relationship. And when you feel safe, then the feelings will express themselves quite naturally often. We need to also remember, though, that, you know, a lot of people exist on the other end of the continuum. And a lot of people struggle with feelings of being not considered by their family, ignored, almost diabetes. I think you and I have had this conversation, Bridget, but it's almost like diabetes is compartmentalized, and it's almost like, okay, so we have our family, we have our relationship, and the diabetes is just a pesky entity that's piggybacking.
An unwanted pet.
Which it may well be, but you know,
It can bite.
And it will bite if you ignore
Yeah.
it. That's the thing. So with both of these ends of the continuum, we need to be thinking about, what do I need from my partner? And then we need to, once we're clear on what we need, and that can change day to day, that's fine.
Yeah.
But once we're clear, we need to find ways of communicating this. That comes easier to some, and some have partners who are incredibly receptive. Others don't. So don't be shy to ask for help in having that conversation if you're not managing to do it yourself. That might be a matter of couples therapy, which is a really good way to build communication.
Yeah.
Communication can be tricky.
I was thinking also maybe writing a letter might help. Like sometimes it's hard to have the conversation face to face, but if you could write it down, that might be easier. What I'm also hearing that's so interesting is identify what it is you need from someone. Like I've literally never thought about that. Like what it is I need from my husband, what it is I need from my family, what it is I need from my friends. And it's so interesting because the friend thing particularly, I'd like us to talk about friends because so I have such a distinct memory of going out with going to a friend's house, two of my besties, like the most wonderful friends you could possibly imagine, not diabetic. And I was experimenting with insulin timing. Daniel has heard me complain a lot about the pains of insulin timing. And so I knew that we were going to have brownies because one of my friends is a baker when we got there. And so I injected before I left because she lives 10 minutes away. Then, of course, the other friend was late. And then everything got delayed. And by the time we finally sat down to eat, my blood sugar was plummeting fast. But instead of being like, dudes, like my blood sugar is going low and I am going to chow these sweets and I feel like my head is disconnected from my body, I like very surreptitiously ate my sweets. They would not have judged me. They would have been super supportive. I think they maybe would have worried a bit much, which is maybe why I didn't do it. But then the same friends I recently went away with, and I had a stomach bug. I was just recovering from a stomach bug, and I was talking about how difficult it is having diabetes and a stomach bug because like electrolytes are harder to get in and keep in, and then because you're eating so little, like you don't know how much is actually stayed in, so the risk of going low overnight is worse. And I mentioned that I always had juice next to my bed, and they were completely freaked out. They were like, is something going to happen tonight? Do we need to know anything? Do we need to have like emergency numbers on hand? And I think, and I reassured them that everything was fine, but I could see an adjustment in their view of what diabetes was, because usually it's just like, oh, you have to jab before we eat, you're fine. Like you have to make sure you have sweets when you go on a hike. And I wonder if there isn't, I haven't done this, I don't know if other people have done it, but if there isn't a way to like introduce diabetes to close friends and close family in a way that isn't overwhelming, but also lets them know how much of your life it impacts. Because Jess, I don't think your question, like, does it impact your life? I don't think that is a dumb question. I don't think people know the answer.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What you got? That was a very convoluted question. Now we're back to me having therapy. Sorry, guys. Live therapy.
Yeah, I think yeah, you kind of you want them to know the gravity, that it isn't just a little disease, but you also don't want them to kind of helicopter around you. So yeah, I mean, I think just an open conversation, an explanation, and this is maybe some work that the person with diabetes must do. Like, what do I need from my friends, and find a way to communicate that quite clearly,
or even communicate
in a way that won't freak them out.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, look, it's hard to manage that. And sometimes these conversations do end up freaking people out. But I do believe that in the context of a supportive relationship, that kind of a freak out can be therapeutic, because it can give us perspective, it can make us connected, and it can motivate us to brainstorm together about how we can move forward from this difficult situation that we're faced with.
Yeah. Or even just, I guess, a better understanding of what the difficult situation looks like day to day. They were honestly floored that this was something I had to think about, and that you could easily get sugar-free electrolytes. And then I discovered Powerade Zero, and I was like, oh, wait, extract that one. Carl has a question I don't know the answer to. Dan mentioned learning to communicate for your own good. I guess we all know the days where you feel alone and overwhelmed, but would communication and replying more on people or partners be overall better for mental health or decrease the amount of burnout days?
Wow, that's a beautiful question. So, okay, so there are multiple ways of answering this one. Firstly, as a psychologist, I believe, and it's not just a belief, it's a data-based belief, that communicating around emotions helps us to manage those emotions. The very act of naming or writing down what you're feeling reduces the intensity of that emotion. So to start with, communication, whether it's self-reflection or expressing this to somebody else, we stand to benefit. When it comes to communication with your partner, it's important to think carefully about this, because we don't want to rush into the situation and say that communication is good, full stop. Communication can be damaging. And in fact, that's been researched in the context of this conversation. So, we know that good support from a partner makes us more likely as diabetics to stick to our diet and to take our insulin and test more frequently. So we've seen benefits from a close supportive relationship. But what they also saw was that people who are going through a crisis, such as full-blown diabetes burnout, such as the loss of a spouse or a parent, such as depression or anxiety, if you're in a state of crisis, then they found that open communication and support from a partner could actually be detrimental. It could actually increase the levels of distress.
Gosh, why?
I think, at that point, a person is just, they're operating in fight or flight mode. Their defenses are sky high, and any attempt to communicate around something which makes them vulnerable, they're needing to open themselves up, and they simply don't have the stamina or the capacity to open themselves up.
And actually, when you're feeling that awful, naming it makes it worse, because then it brings it even more to life.
I would say that naming it personally is therapeutic. But if you're going to have a conversation with your partner about it, that opens up doors for the system, the relationship, to be overwhelmed. And what I mean there, if I'm going through full-blown diabetes burnout, or I'm experiencing a depressive episode, which many diabetics do, it's not appropriate for me to expect Jess to provide the support for me to get myself out of that. I need to, if I'm depressed, I need to see my therapist. If I have diabetes burnout, the same thing. But if I have a communication session with Jess where I explain to her the gravity of how difficult things are, I'm then placing some pretty intense expectations on her. And that might end up being counterproductive. So what I'd recommend, instead of, if you're going through a crisis, and this is also very important for partners, we want to support our spouse who has diabetes. We want to be communicative. But it's also important for you to have boundaries. Just because they have diabetes, it doesn't mean that you need to sacrifice everything for their emotional well-being. It needs to be a balancing act. And if your partner's depressed, it's not your responsibility to take them out of the depression. It's your responsibility to walk with them and encourage them to get the right help.
Phew, that's so powerful. And Angela's just corroborated that. My husband has type 2, and sometimes I feel overwhelmed. And you are so not alone in that, Angela. There are so many who feel that way. We have a bunch of questions that I'm aware of the time. There's one more kind of tying this up that we had from our community from Carl. This one, I'm throwing this one at you, Jess. He said, is it essential for a partner to know diabetes inside and out, way more than just knowing how a hypo kit works? Are diabetics so fragile that they really do need constant worrying over? What's going to happen to my health in the future? How do I prepare for what's inevitable? Or what should I say to my partner about what's in store? So it's kind of like the really long view of what we've been talking about. How much of that is necessary to think through, do you think?
Yeah. Look, I feel like knowing diabetes inside and out. I mean, I think it's more important. I mean, you'll know enough about the disease by being with somebody, but I think having to go open kind of endocrinology textbooks, that's unnecessary. I think in terms of kind of longer term implications, maybe discuss with your partner. Maybe I can, attend your next appointment with you so that I can ask my own questions of the doctor. And yeah, just following their lead. It's you don't want to you don't want to police them. But if you're talking about kind of more medical long term, I think including the doctor in that discussion is probably best, and preferably not Dr. Google, like your actual doctor. Just to see. Yeah. Because if you Google something, it's going to tell you this is going to happen. This is going to happen.
You're going to die within 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah. So having a conversation with somebody who's a little bit more knowledgeable, like who has more knowledge again. That's probably what I would suggest.
And it's not that they're fragile. I thought that was such an interesting way of putting it, that they need constant worrying over. Like, I don't feel that I'm fragile at all, and I don't think I need to be worried about, but you do need the people around you to be informed. Someone, Marilla was saying here, it's important for your partner or family to know the symptoms of low or high sugar levels. My partner would wake if I feel too warm or sweating a lot while sleeping. I think that saved my life. And as Carl was saying, like, it's important to know how to use a hypo kit. It's important to know, like, the difference between sugar and insulin and not be doing the wrong things, that kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, then there's almost the emotional resilience part of it. I want to ask Renique's question because I do not know the answer. And I also want to just blanket apologize for butchering everyone's names. I'm sure I'm pronouncing them all wrong. How do you deal with family members that are possibly over-supportive or overly concerned? A lot of in-laws or grandparents don't really understand type 1 and only know diabetes as the cliched diagnoses of needing to be old, overweight, and eat too much sugar. I'm currently on a pump, and my mother-in-law phoned my husband about how dangerous the pump is, how I should go back to my old regime. Having said that, a blood sugar of 7.7 gets a gasp and a freak out about how high that is. Oh my goodness, I would not be doing well in that scenario. Nick, what have you got? If family members are overly concerned and possibly overly concerned and undereducated, it sounds like.
Wow, that's and again, it's quite a common scenario that we're sitting with here. It happens a lot. People are overly anxious. It comes from a good place, but it's counterproductive. And ultimately, it's kind of unfair because you have the burden of managing this condition, but ultimately, you also have the burden of setting boundaries around what's right for you and what's not. And that's, I would think, what is needed in this situation.
Awkward though, with in-laws.
Very, very tough.
Can you give us some words?
Right. I mean, like Jess said, this is not a conversation that you have in the heat of the moment. This is a conversation that you have retrospectively. But it can be, again, you want to name your feelings and you want to elaborate on them. So when you said that 7.7 was super high, it made me feel like you're not all that connected with what this is like for me. And it made me feel a bit irritated that you're so up in my business when I'm just trying my best to manage myself. Doing so in a sensitive way that, again, you start with your feelings and that establishes a connection and it makes you vulnerable so that the person feels like they're being invited to weigh in and say where they were coming from. And then you follow that dialogue.
Okay.
You could also just
and that takes the sting out.
Yeah. You could also just say, thank you. I'll discuss it with my doctor.
I would probably go more that route. But I think it's maybe the less mature one.
Right.
One of the best forms of support I get from my wife is that she joins me for my doctor's appointments. If there's any questions we need to ask the doctor, she makes sure to ask them and takes some notes of what the doctor said. That is actually lovely because that also takes the sting out of it, because it's not saying, why is your blood sugar high? It's saying to the doctor, I feel weird about this, but maybe I shouldn't. And then the doctor can put them in, like, put the situation in perspective. Guys, there have been so many amazing questions. Chanel's asked one that I need to ask because I don't know what the answer is. What can I say to my 6-year-old to help him cope with his diabetes, and how can I support him when he feels depressed or sad some days? Oh man, I want to give your 6-year-old a hug.
Yeah, jeepers. I mean, I think when he's feeling very sad some days, you just want to, just say that's okay. It's okay to feel sad today. I'm here for you. I love you the way you are. We all get sad sometimes. It's okay to feel sad. It's a difficult thing. You might just want to completely just name that for him, because you might not just have the words yet. And then I'm not sure about managing his own diabetes. If there's anything you can say about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the obviously it's very young, and again, I want to emphasize, parents in this position, like you said, Bridget, the challenge that they face is it's something else. It really is something else, and there's no rule book for approaching this. In terms of, he needs to move towards independence with his diabetes care, but that needs to be a continuous conversation with your doctor and a incremental change. But I agree with Jess completely. Whatever we say as parents, our child is feeling what they're feeling. If we try and distract or ignore or divert, that can be counterproductive.
Yeah, it can devalue their feelings.
Exactly. Or it can teach them that it's not okay to feel these feelings. It can lead them to suppress the feelings. If you're naming that sadness in exactly the way that Jess said, you're providing your child with the tools to introspect and to change that emotional experience. And that's going to be relevant, whether or not you have diabetes. That's really good.
And throughout their lives.
Yeah.
I follow this lovely psychologist called Dr. Becky Good, with an E, on Instagram, and she specifically talks about kids. And she said, when your child comes to you with a big emotion, your temptation is always to fix it, right? It's to be like, oh, it's not that bad, or it'll be fine, or oh, we'll fix it together. And she said, all they're really wanting when they come to you with a big emotion is just to be heard and to recognize that it's safe to feel that emotion. So to be like, oh, I felt like that before, that sucks. Or like, oh, diabetes makes me sad some days too. It sometimes feels so unfair, doesn't it? And that feels very counterintuitive as a parent for me, because we feel like we should have the answers, right? And we should be able to make it all better. But I think, particularly with something like this, that imagine learning acceptance, or beginning to learn acceptance at 6.
Yeah.
Gosh, like, how emotionally mature are you going to be at 16 and 26 and 36 and onward?
Right.
Absolutely. I didn't learn that then. We are almost out of time. I'm so sad. I could talk about this stuff for ages. Any final words from either of you on being the partner to someone with diabetes, or being a person with diabetes, and navigating different relationships? You each get a chance for final words.
You can do it. It's absolutely, it's doable. I love, Daniel is who he is. He has diabetes. It's added extra flavor, shall I say, to our
a little bit of cayenne pepper.
Yeah, exactly. But I wouldn't have it any other way. He is who he is, and that he's my person. So I wouldn't change anything about him. And yeah, everybody, you guys you've got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's look, it's easier together. You need to unite and communicate, again, that word, in a way that helps you to both feel like you're connected in this challenge. And that often is a work in progress, but know that what you're embarking on there is this very same ingredient that makes for any healthy relationship, irrespective of diabetes. It's about how do we be there for one another through our respective challenges? How do we communicate so that we understand one another's needs? And how do we make it such that we are a team in life?
Yeah.
So it's a necessary conversation whether or not diabetes is in the picture.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Daniel and Jess, for joining us and for being so open and vulnerable and sharing with us. Thank you to all our amazing attendees. Gosh, there were so many fantastic questions coming in. We are going to have to do another one of these. And I want to say big thanks to Vital Air Diabetes for making this event possible and for suggesting it. Vital Air Diabetes, for those who missed it at the beginning, acquired Epitech Diabetes in July 2022, and they're now the supplier of Dexcom and Tandem in South Africa, and they sponsored this evening's event, and we are very grateful to them. This was fascinating. Thank you so much, and let's do another one. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, and now there's about another 100,000 questions I have underneath the surface. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Cool.
Bye.
Thank you.